What's up, YouTube? Ladies and gentlemen, hey, it's Doug Gazer here. Hey, today was a pretty interesting day. I was involved in a forum today where they were talking about the difference between right to travel and driving without a driver's license. So, as I've said before, and I've said it time and time again, so many people are so brainwashed into believing that driving is a privilege. And this guy, he got on there claiming that he was a law professor and that he knew the laws and that he knew what he was talking about, to be factual, etc., etc. And I challenged him. I said, well, it has been a long time coming because so many people are trying to debunk a lot of stuff. They're trying to debunk just about anything and everything that comes out, which I'm one of those too. I am one of those who will try to debunk things. I admit it. I'm one of those guys. However, when it comes to the law, as to how it's read, how it stands, I don't take that lightly. This guy, he was on here and he swore up and down that he knew the law. He swore up and down that he needed a license to drive, and etc., etc. So I told him, I said, you know what? I'm going to read a petition to you that I'm in the process of doing right now. And in that petition, it explains how you can beat driving without a license. Now, keep in mind, as I've mentioned before, this is not legal advice that I'm giving to you, even though it is factual law that I am citing to you, untainted, okay, meaning that I have not added what I needed to be in there or took out something. No, I didn't do any of that, okay. What I've done was I've taken the law word for word, put it in perspective, laid it down, and now I'm interpreting. Simple. No other type of translation needs to be added, or I don't even know why I said that, but you know what I mean. I have not altered this law in any way. This law comes straight from the law books, not off of YouTube, not off of Google, not any of that, because so many people come in there and they adapt, extract, and add things to fit their agenda. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I don't have an agenda. All I have is the facts that I want to bring forth to y'all. That's it. No agenda. Like I said, I'm not on here trying to get popular. I don't care if you don't even like the videos. I don't care if you view them. I don't care if you don't watch them all the way through. I don't care. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for popularity. I'm here for education. I even educate myself when I sit down and I start reading certain case law, and then I realize, oh wow, I didn't know that. No one is subjected to not learning something if they do not take the time to apply. Knowledge falls short to no one who takes the time to apply and search for it. Bottom line, if you want knowledge, hey, you got to go get it. You got to go find it. Now, I'm not saying that about common sense, because a lot of people know they could be smart as a whip but lack common sense. Albert Einstein was a master of it. He was a genius, but he lacked common sense. So with that being said, I want to get right off into this because I don't want this video to be long. So keep in mind that what I'm telling you is in reference to a forum. So when I started reading off this petition, and then when I got done, and you should have heard all the comments because everybody was riding on this guy's words and everything until I read this petition that I am actually working on. This is just a draft of the petition, but for the most part, it's mostly done now. And I've told you that I was working on some things. So, yeah, I'm working on some things, but, So, the right to travel. The question of law, whenever you file a petition, you have to ask a question of law. So my question was, can a government legally put restrictions on the rights of the American people at any time or any reason? For years, professionals within the criminal justice system have acted on the belief that traveling by motor vehicle was a privilege that was given to a citizen only after approval by their state government in the form of a permit or license to drive. In other words, the individual must be granted the privilege before his use of state highways was considered legal. Legislators, police officers, court officials are becoming aware that there are court decisions that disprove the belief that driving is a privilege and therefore requires a government approval in the form of a license. The right of a citizen to travel upon the public highways and to transport his property thereon in the ordinary course of life and business is a common right, which he has under the right to enjoy life and liberty, to acquire and possess property, and to pursue happiness and safety. It includes the right in so doing, to use the ordinary and usual conveyances of the day. Usual conveyances. There's your key words right there. Conveyance. Usual conveyance means mode of transportation. What are you using? Either your feet, an automobile, a motorcycle. Plain and simple. Conveyances of the day and under the existing modes of travel includes the right to drive a horse-drawn carriage or wagon thereon, or operate an automobile thereon, for the usual and ordinary purpose of life and business. It is not a mere privilege, like the privilege of moving a house in the street, operating a business, stand in the street, or transporting persons or property for hire along the street, which a city may permit or prohibit at will. Thompson versus State 155. When you review these laws, some of the older laws that's been in play, you'll come to realize that a lot of the rules are in fact in reference to commercial use of the highways for commercial use. Now granted, in that aspect, the state has the power to regulate the movement of commercial and business operations performed on the highways. They do have the power to do that. Just so you know. It could not be stated more directly or conclusively that the citizens of the state have a common law right to travel without approval or restriction license, and that this right is protected under the U.S. Constitution. The right to travel is a part of the liberty of which the citizen cannot be derived without due process of law under the Fifth Amendment. Kent versus Duels 357. The right to travel, to go from place to place as the means of transportation permit, is a natural right subject to the rights of others and to reasonable regulation under law. A restraint imposed by the government of the United States upon this liberty therefore must conform with the provisions of the Fifth Amendment, that no person shall be deprived of liberty without due process. Meaning, in order for the state to enact a statute, it has to go before the legislation. That legislation has to go before, I believe, Congress, and then so on down the line. And then what it has to do is it has to bring forth a petition to amend the Constitution to support that statute. If it is not in the Constitution, Constitution, the statute does not stand. Period. There's only two ways that you can take the rights from the people. Two ways. Only two ways, and there's only been two ways for centuries. One way, the Constitution has to be amended. The second way is if the citizen themselves voluntarily and knowingly waive their rights. That is the only two ways that you can have your rights taken away from you. Remember that. As hard as it is for those in law enforcement to believe, there is no room for speculation in these court decisions. American citizens do indeed have the inalienable right to use the roadways unrestricted in any manner, as long as they are not damaging or violating property or rights of others. Government, in requiring the people to obtain driver's licenses and registrations, vehicle inspections, and DUI, DWI roadblocks without question, is restricting and therefore violating the people's common law right to travel. Is this a new legal interpretation on the subject? Apparently not. This means that the beliefs and opinions our state legislators, the courts, and those in law enforcement have acted upon for years have been in error. Researchers who armed themselves with actual facts, not sovereign, what do you call it? Where they go in there and they want to take certain things into the law that actually aren't in the law. That's illegal. They want to take and make it to where it fits their agenda. Okay, so you go in here and you reconstruct. There you go. You reconstruct the law by putting things in it that the law doesn't even express, or the law doesn't even support, for that matter. There was one law I read where whoever put the add-on in there, it didn't even it had nothing to do with the actual law itself. But anyway, researchers armed with actual facts state in determining that to restrict the movement of the individual in the free exercise of his right to travel is a serious breach of those freedoms secured by the U.S. Constitution and most state constitutions. What that means is it's unlawful. The revelation that the American citizen has always had the inalienable right to travel raises profound questions for those who are involved in making and enforcing state law. So, if the states have been enforcing laws that are unconstitutional on their face, such as turning a right into a privilege or a right into a crime, it would seem that there must be some way that the state can legally put restrictions such as licensing requirements, mandatory insurance, vehicle registration, vehicle inspection, to name a few, on a citizen's constitutionally protected rights. The answer to this question can be found here in Hurtado versus California 110. The U.S. Supreme Court states very plainly, the state cannot diminish the rights of the people. In Bennett versus Boggs, statutes that violate the plain and obvious principles of common right and common reason are null and void. These judicial decisions are straight to the point and leaving no room for speculation, that there is no lawful method for government to put restrictions or limitations on rights belonging to the people. Other cases are even more straightforward. The assertion of federal rights when plainly and reasonably is not to be defeated under the name of local practice, Davis versus Western. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. That's Miranda versus Arizona. Very powerful landmark case right there. The claim and exercise of the constitutional right cannot thus be converted into a crime. Miller versus the U.S. There can be no sanction or penalty imposed upon one who because of his exercise of constitutional rights. Shahar versus Cohen, 481. You can even find the answer to this question. Can a government legally put restrictions on the rights of the American people at any time for any reason? In Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution and laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding the following, are bound by the supreme law. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislators, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support the Constitution. Yeah, it gets real juicy, I mean, there's a lot of people, they want to doubt it. Like I said, they want to try to debunk it. Well, I mean, that's your right. You can go ahead and try to do it, but make sure you do it lawfully. Okay? Ignorance of these laws is no excuse for such acts by officials. It is a felony and federal crime to violate or deprive citizens of their constitutionally protected rights. The system of law dictates that there are only two ways to legally remove a right belonging to the people. Here we go is what I was just telling you earlier. These are by lawfully amending the Constitution and or by a person knowingly waiving a particular right. Some of the confusion on our present system has arisen because many millions of people have waived their right to travel unrestricted and volunteered into the jurisdiction of the state, meaning they gave up rights that they didn't even know they had to drive under the state. Those who have knowingly given up these rights are now legally regulated by the state law and must acquire the proper permits and registrations. There are basically two groups of people in this category. Citizens who involve themselves in commerce upon the highways of the state. Here's what the courts had to say about this. For a while, citizen has the right to travel upon the public highways and to transport his property thereon. The right does not extend to the use of the highways as a place for private gain. For the latter purpose, no person has a vested right to use the highways of the state, but it is a privilege. That's where the privilege comes in. Once you sign that license, it becomes a privilege, okay, which the state may grant or withhold at its discretion. So now, you sign, you get this license. Now all of a sudden those protected rights that you had, now you do not have, because at any given time the state can pull that privilege away from you. Then you're stuck with what? Nothing. They take the privilege away, but you still have your rights. That is true. Okay, so, and anyway, that's State versus Johnson 75. There are many court cases that confirm and point out the difference between the right of a citizen to travel and the governmental privilege, as well as numerous other decisions to spell out the jurisdiction issue in these two distinctively different activities. It must be left up to the officers to research it for themselves. So, part of your right to travel and the privilege is a jurisdictional issue, easily resolved. You sign a license, you're under the jurisdiction of the state. You don't sign a license, you're under the jurisdiction of the people, the citizenship of the state. Simple. The second group of citizens that is legally under the jurisdiction of the state are those voluntarily and knowingly waiving their right to travel unregulated and unrestricted by requesting placement under such jurisdiction through the acquisition of a state driver's license, vehicle registration, mandatory insurance. In short, contract. You are contracting with the state to drive. Whether it's commercial, whether it's not commercial. The bottom line is you're signing a contract, so here's the answer to that. Again, This is not reconstructed law. This is not, a lot of this is me putting the words together and putting the laws in there to show you how, if you word it correctly, the laws match it perfect. They support everything you say. Okay, so in short, by contract is what I was telling you. So we should remember what makes this legal. What makes it legal is, and not a violation of the common law right to travel, is that they knowingly volunteered by contract to waive their rights. So if you knowingly volunteered to waive your rights, you can't come back later and start crying about, well, they violated my rights. No, you knew what you was getting yourself into. You knew that in order for you to be able to do this, you had to waive this. In order for you to comply here, you had to do this. You knew this. You signed on the dotted line to waive rights. If they were, now, where it becomes a violation is if they were forced, coerced, or knowingly placed under the state's powers. For unknowingly being placed under the state's powers, the courts have said it was very clear violation of the rights. Meaning, if they were forced to, which 90% of your revised codes, they force you. So now raises the question of what percentage of the people in each state have applied for and received licenses, registrations, and obtained insurance after erroneously being advised by their government that it was mandatory. The law has already proven that driving is a right. It's a fundamental right of the common law for the citizens. The Supreme Court's already laid that down. It's set in stone. We can assume that the majority of those Americans carrying state licensing and vehicle registration have no knowledge of the rights they have waived in obeying laws such as these that the U.S. Constitution clearly states are unlawful. Laws of no effect. Laws that are not laws at all. Meaning state regulations like RCWs, penal codes, revised codes, statutes. Statutes have to derive and be supported by that of the Constitution. With Supreme Court cases, the law of the land support it as well. You cannot just make a statute and say, follow it. An area of serious consideration for every police officer is to understand the most important law in our land, which he has taken an oath to protect, defend, and enforce, is not state laws and city or county ordinance, but the law that supersedes all other laws, the U.S. Constitution. Every police officer should keep the following U.S. court ruling discussed earlier in mind before issuing citations concerning license, registration, and insurance. The claim and exercise of a constitutional right cannot thus be converted into a crime. Miller versus U.S. 230. Traveling freely without restrictions going about one's daily activities is the exercise of the most basic right and is inalienable. So, basically, the bottom line is right there. The whole point of the issue is the right of the people have the right to move freely in the United States without restriction and no government interference. And that, when I presented that to that forum, that guy shut the forum down. He shut the forum down real quick because he knew he was wrong. And, you know, after people started hearing what I'm telling them and highly expressing to them that no, these were not reconstructed to fit someone's agenda. No, these laws were not, you know. I urge you to sit down and look at the laws that I'm telling you, that I'm citing here, and see for yourself that exactly what I'm saying is in the law. Again, I don't have an agenda, so I have nothing to prove. I'm just here to educate, you know. And if someone has something that contradicts anything that I've said, then by all means get on and drop a comment in the box, you know, put the case law that you're citing this from, and then we'll go from there, you know, because I'll go and I'll research the case law that you're citing it from, and then 9 times out of 10, I'm probably going to find something that's even more powerful than what you presented, and that your case that you're quoting from has probably been amended and or hasn't even been argued, because there are so many case law petitions and writs and appeals that go to the courts, and they don't even make it past the federal level, based on the fact that the Supreme Court usually only accepts cases that were passed through from the state court. You got to remember, that's a family. They have lower levels in the family, you know. So the lower levels: state, federal, supreme. If it passes in the state, it's going to go to the federal. If the feds agree with the state, then it'll go to the supreme. But on the same note, if the Supreme Court deems that that case does not carry weight to be heard in its jurisdiction, it won't be heard. And 90% of those cases are never seen. So you can sit there and say, well, yeah, I got this petition right here, blah, blah, blah. Let me see the opinion. Let me see the opinion and show me where, in relation to that case, it was granted. Because I do know of tons of cases I've seen. Matter of fact, I was watching one a few weeks ago on YouTube where a young man went into the court and he was talking about his right to drive on the streets without driver's license, registration, etc. So this is just traffic court. Fortunately for him, the case was dismissed, but not for the reasons he went in that courtroom for. The only reason why the case was dismissed was for the simple fact that so much time had passed from the time he had received the traffic tickets that he got from the officer that issued the citation, that the officer did not show up in court. One, the prosecutor called the officer, and on the phone the officer openly admitted that due to the length of time that passed in between the time he gave whoever it was the ticket to the time now, that he would not effectively be able to get on the stand and say that that was the individual he issued the citations to. So with that being said, the state cannot pursue their case because their star witness can't positively identify the individual. Now, even though the young man was up there trying to fight to present his case as, you know, a right, etc., etc., again, it was dismissed based on other attributes of the case, which, ironically enough, that's what the states do to shut these arguments down. They'll dismiss cases based on other attributes of a case to avoid having to address the issue of driving without a license, the right to travel without a license, registration, and or forced insurance. They do this on purpose because they know that if they shut it down right there at the beginning, it has no tail end. However, the appellate process gives you a voice, and as long as you have a logical, lawful, constitutional question, always remember, when you go to do your petitions, you want to start your petitions off with a legal question of law. Now, this question, you want to make sure, because this question is what you're going to be arguing in your brief, in your petition, whatever it is you're presenting to the court. And you want to make sure that you have researched this question, front, top, back, forth, upside down, inside out. You want to make sure that you've covered every single base. Okay? So, with that said, that's enough for me today. I am going to get up out of here because I still have a lot more work to do. And, you know, it's not over. We're going to continue fighting. We're going to keep going, and we're going to keep plugging away. And for those of you who get on here and you watch these videos and you go, oh, they're anti-government. No, I'm not anti-government. I'm actually pro-government. I'm just not willing to accept what the government says at face value and bow my head down and say, okay, well, that's what they said. No, I'm not that guy. That doesn't make me anti-government. That makes me pro-citizen. Because while you're sitting there accepting what is being said and doing nothing about it, I'm one of those guys that's out there trying to make a difference, to make it a better way for us. Because it will be very, very short coming when the states begin to dictate what you can and can't do. And that's all we need is another Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein, and any of these other great dictators that were running around here. But one thing for sure, two things for certain, keep it in mind, all dictators fall. So, with that being said, y'all get out there, keep the good fight. Have a blessed day. Dark Angels out.